Welcome back, wanderers of the dark woods, to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight, draw your cloak tight, keep your lantern low, and do not answer if you hear a horn sounding from the trees. This is not the Robin Hood of bright songs and merry laughter. This is the old outlaw of Sherwood and Barnsdale, the wolf in Lincoln Green, the man whose name was whispered by merchants with trembling mouths and by sheriffs with hands upon their sword hilts. This is the tale of Robin Hood as the roads remembered him, not as the minstrels softened him. A tale of tribute, blood, oaths, broken bones, and the dreadful end that waited for the king of outlaws behind a locked priory door. Now let's begin. In the damp years, when England stank of tallow smoke, wet wool, and open graves, there lay a road between Nottingham and the north that no wise man crossed after dusk. It wound through Sherwood Forest, through ranks of black oak and ash so thick that sunlight broke upon the leaves like coins thrown into deep water. The forest was royal land, or so the law said, but law was a thin thing beneath those trees. It could be torn, buried, or nailed to a trunk with a broadhead arrow through its parchment heart. The sheriff of Nottingham claimed those roads for the king. Robin Hood claimed them for himself. Nottingham rose beyond the forest in smoke and stone, with its castle crouched upon the sandstone rock like a beast with iron teeth. Below it, the market streets groaned with carts and swine, with leather aprons and fish guts, with priests gliding past beggars as if poverty were catching. Bells rang from St. Mary's Church, and the sound rolled over the roofs like judgment. In the town, men crossed themselves at Robin's name, then lowered their voices. Some called him a deliverer, some called him a devil. Most called him whatever would keep them alive. He lived where the greenwood grew foul and ancient, where the moss swallowed hoof prints and old bones pushed up after rain. Robin Hood was not young when this tale truly began, but he still carried youth in the cruel light of his eyes. His hair was the red-brown of old leaves, though streaks of gray had begun to show near his temples. His face was handsome in the way a blade is handsome, all sharpness and use. There was laughter in him, yes, but it was laughter that made men glance toward exits. He wore a hood of faded green and a leather jerkin darkened by weather, sweat, and other stains that no rain could quite wash out. Across his back hung a bow taller than some men, polished by years of handling. At his belt rested a long knife with a dark horn grip, and those who saw it drawn seldom had cause to describe it afterward. Beside him stood Little John, who was little only in jest. He was a towering man with shoulders like a church door and hands broad enough to close around a man's face. He carried a staff of seasoned ash bound with iron at either end, and when he smiled, his teeth showed through a beard as black as a rook's wing. Little John had once been a man of simpler mirth, but years under Robin had taught him the language of cracked ribs and silent graves. Much the miller's son was smaller, quick-footed, and pale, with flowers still somehow seeming to cling to him, no matter how long he lived in the woods. His eyes darted like a rat's. He could slip through brush without sound and cut a purse without brushing the cloth. Well, Scarlet wore red when he could get it, not bright courtly red, but the deep dried red of clotted wool. He loved fine boots, silver buckles, and the screaming moment when a proud man realized that velvet could not stop a knife. There were others too. Gilbert with the white hand, whose fingers were scarred from bowstrings. Reynold Greenleaf, who could track a deer across stone. Arthur a Bland, once a tanner, who smelled forever of hides and smoke. Friar Tuck came later and went often, a barrel-bellied priest with a laugh too loud and a temper too near the surface. But even he feared Robin when the outlaw grew quiet. They called themselves merry men, and sometimes they were merry. Around fires, they drank stolen wine from bishops' wagons and sang until the owls fell silent. They roasted venison forbidden by forest law, cracked bones for marrow, threw dice on cloak cloth, and told stories of fools who thought a seal from the king could protect them among trees. Their laughter rose into the boughs while, not far away, someone tied to an oak whimpered through broken teeth. Robin ruled by gift, fear, and debt. A poor plowman might stumble into camp after losing his ox to a tax collector, and Robin would clap him on the shoulder, feed him, and send him home with silver in his fist. But the plowman would never forget the eyes of the men watching from the trees. Later, when the outlaw's horn sounded near his fields, he would bring bread, ale, news of patrols, and the names of any stranger asking too many questions. Charity was never free in Sherwood. It had roots. It grew hooks. Robin's mercy was a net. He forbade his men to harm women unless a woman carried a message for the sheriff. He forbade them to rob poor farmers unless those farmers hid soldiers in their barns. He would not strip a beggar, but he would make that beggar carry word from village to village that the road belonged to him. He spared men often enough for songs to grow around it, yet not so often that the ditches remained empty. The wealthy learned to pay. Merchants traveling from York toward Nottingham hired guards and prayed beneath their breath. Bishops rode with servants, reliquaries, and fat purses tucked beneath their robes. Royal officers carried writs, warrants, and arrogance. All entered Sherwood as men with names. Many left as examples. On a wet Michaelmas evening, a company came south through the forest with mule bells muffled in cloth. They thought themselves clever. At their head rode a wool merchant named Osbert of Lincoln, broad-bellied and red-cheeked, with 3 pack animals loaded with cloth, coin, and French wine. He had paid the sheriff for escort and boasted at the Blue Boar in that no forest cutthroat would touch him, while Nottingham's steel rode at his side. The trees heard him. The trees always heard. Mist lay low among the roots. The road was a ribbon of mud. Osbert's guards were uneasy, 6 men in leather caps, spears angled outward, eyes searching the brush. Then a stag stepped into the road. It was huge, antlered, and white as bone. The mule stopped. One guard cursed. Another made the sign of the cross. The stag stared with black eyes, then turned its head slowly toward the trees. A horn sounded. Arrows came as if the forest had exhaled them. The first guard fell backward with a shaft through his mouth. The second dropped his spear and tried to scream, but an arrow under his chin pinned his tongue to the roof of his skull. One mule reared, its eyes rolling, and Osbert shouted for men who were already dying. Little John stepped from the mist and brought his staff down on a guard's knee. The joint bent the wrong way with a wet crack, while Scarlet moved behind another and opened his throat so neatly that the man stood blinking for 3 breaths before the blood spilled hot over his collar. Much slithered beneath a mule's belly, cut the load ropes, and laughed when bolts of cloth slid into the mud. Robin appeared last, not rushing, not shouting. He walked down the road with his bow in hand and his hood shadowing his face. Osbert drew a dagger. It shook like a candle flame. Robin smiled. "Good even, Master Merchant," he said. "You have crossed my hall without greeting your host." "This is the King's Road," Osbert stammered. Robin looked around at the archers in the mist, at the bodies twitching in the mud, at the white stag vanishing between the trees. "The king is not here." Osbert offered money, then more money, then all of it. Robin listened with the patience of a confessor. When the merchant had finished, Robin took from him not only the coin, not only the cloth, not only the wine, but a written promise that Osbert would deliver 2 wagons of grain to 3 villages that had fed Robin through winter. Osbert wept with relief when he thought he would live. Then one of the wounded guards, the man with the broken knee, began crawling toward Nottingham. Little John glanced at Robin. The outlaw sighed, as if disappointed by poor manners. "Witnesses are costly," he said. Little John walked after the crawling man. The staff rose and fell once. The sound was small beneath the trees. Osbert stared, his lips moved. No prayer came. Robin leaned close enough for Osbert to smell the wood smoke in his hair. "You will tell the sheriff I spared you because you paid the price. You will tell him the others died because they forgot whose leaves hung above them. And if your tongue grows bold in any court, I will come to Lincoln, and I will find your counting house, and I will teach your sons the shape of silence." Us but left shouched barefoot, stripped to his linen, his face grey as tallow. By dawn, Nottingham knew. By noon, every merchant at market knew. By nightfall, 3 villages had grain. The songs would later say Robin gave to the poor. They did not sing of the guard's skull in the mud, or of the way much prud rings from fingers before the hands had stopped curling. The sheriff of Nottingham was not a fool, though fools often wear fine chains. He was a hard man named William de Wundonal in some mouths, though others simply called him the sheriff, as if the office had eaten the man. He had narrow eyes, a trimmed beard, and a habit of rubbing his thumb across his signet ring whenever anger mastered him. His hall in Nottingham Castle smelled of wax, damp stone, and fear. Prisoners heard boots above them in the dark and knew that law had weight. It was the weight of chains. He hated Robin Hood with a hatred that had matured past rage into ritual. Every season he swore he would hang him. Every season Robin sent him some insult wrapped in stolen cloth. Once it was a purse taken from the sheriff's own tax chest. Once it was the sheriff's hunting glove filled with black feathers. Once it was a severed deer head crowned with the sheriff's lost chain of office, left on the castle steps before dawn. The sheriff called men from Nottingham, Derby, and York. He hired foresters who knew the old tracks. He paid informers. He threatened villages. He hanged 2 charcoal burners for carrying bread into the trees. Their bodies swung at the forest edge until crows hollowed their eyes. That was when Robin came to the gallows. It was dusk, and the sheriff's men had gone back to town, leaving the bodies as a warning. Rain fell softly. The charcoal burners' wives knelt in the mud below their husbands, not daring to cut them down. Then the greenwood shifted. Men stepped out, faces hidden, bows strung. Robin looked up at the dead. "Who saw them feed us?" he asked. No one answered. He turned to Mudge. "Find out." By morning, the informer was nailed to the door of his own shed by the palms of his hands. He was alive when the village found him. His tongue had been cut, and in his mouth someone had placed 2 black feathers. On the shed wall, written in charcoal, were the words, "Bread is not treason." The sheriff understood the message. So did every village within 20 miles. From then on, when the sheriff asked who helped Robin Hood, men lowered their eyes and remembered that the law might hang them in public, but Shoast could come at night. Not long after, a monk from St. Mary's Abbey came through the forest, riding a sleek horse with silver bells on the bridle. His habit was dark, his face was soft, and under his saddlecloth he carried letters for the sheriff. He had recognized Robin in Nottingham once, kneeling at Mass beneath the painted saints. Robin had come alone that day after quarreling with Little John over a shooting wager, proud enough to risk the town and stubborn enough to pray where enemies could see him. The monk had whispered to the sheriff, and Robin had been seized after a brutal struggle in the churchyard, where he broke one man's jaw with the edge of his bow and drove another's face into a stone trough until teeth floated in the water. The sheriff had locked Robin in Nottingham Castle, and for one night the town slept thinking the Greenwood king was caged. Little John changed that. With much beside him, he waylaid the monk on the road. The monk knew them before they spoke. His mouth opened to call upon God, but Little John struck him across the face with such force that one eye burst dark against his cheek. Much found the letters. "This is the one," he said. The monk gurgled through blood. He tried to crawl. He was a holy man, and perhaps he expected holy fear. Little John knelt beside him. "You sold Robin for favor," he said. "Did the sheriff pay in silver or promises?" The monk spat red into the leaves. Much looked nervous. John, Little John, did not look away from the monk. Robin would want him quiet. They buried the monk under bracken and leaves. His little page, a boy who had seen too much, stood trembling beside the horse. Much could not meet the boy's eyes. "Let him go," Much whispered. Little John's face was terrible in the dimness. "He knows us." The boy ran. He made it 6 steps before the arrow took him. That night, Little John and Much disguised themselves in the monk's clothing and rode to the king's court with forged cheer, carrying letters that told of Robin's capture. They returned with royal seals and reward money, walked into Nottingham Castle under false honor, and cut Robin free from stone and iron. In the escape, a porter died with his own keys pushed deep into his throat, and a Jella was found in the morning hanging upside down from a stair rail, his face swollen black. When Robin returned to Shotst, the forest roared. They drank until dawn. Robin kissed Little John on both cheeks and gave Much a jeweled clasp taken from the monk's saddle. He asked few questions. Perhaps he already knew. Perhaps he did not care. The dead had served him. That was the way of Shotst. The years deepened. The legend grew teeth. Guy of Juspana came in a horse-hide cloak, wearing the skin of a beast, with its head hanging over his own like some pagan nightmare. He was a killer hired to hunt a killer, lean and yellow-eyed, carrying a sword nicked by use. He found Robin near Bunstall on a morning of pale frost, and the 2 men circled each other among the trees, while ravens watched from the branches. Guy spoke Robin's name like a curse. Robin answered with a grin. Their fight was ugly. Not the clean play of minstrels, not bright blades ringing in sunlight, but mud, breath, elbows, and blood. Guy cut Robin across the ribs. Robin drove a knee into Guy's belly and smashed his mouth with the bow stave. Guy bit Robin's hand hard enough to tuss skin from the thumb. Robin laughed then, high and wild, and the sound frightened even the birds. When it ended, Guy lay on his back, choking. Robin stood over him, panting, his cheek split, his hand red. Guy tried to speak. Robin placed one boot on his throat. "Carry no message for the sheriff," Robin said. He pressed down until the man's heels drummed the earth. Later, Robin wore Guy's horse-hide cloak and used it to deceive the sheriff's men. The songs would make it clever. The men who saw Robin in that dead skin spoke later of a figure moving through the fog like judgment, wearing a flayed beast. In those days, the poor did not love Robin as children love a gentle father. They loved him as starving men love fire. Fire warms. Fire cooks. Fire also takes a house if fed wrong. A widow named Ullasun once came to him from a hamlet near Wuxup. Her landlord, a knight fallen into debt and cruelty, had taken her cow and threatened her eldest son with service. Robin listened while she knelt in wet leaves. His men watched from around the camp. Little John ate from a knife, while Scarlet combed his hair with his fingers. Much stared into the fire. Robin lifted Ullasun by the hand and gave her back twice the value of the cow from a merchant's purse. He sent men that night to the knight's hall. They did not kill the knight. Robin was careful with symbols. They dragged him from his bed, naked and squealing, and tied him in his own cattle shed. They slaughtered 3 of his best oxen and hung their steaming entrails over the rafters like festival garlands. They filled his mouth with mud and made him sign away Ullasun's debt by candlelight, while Will Scarlet held a knife beneath the knight's eye. The next morning, the village found the knight alive, though his hair had turned white in places. Ullasun kept her cow when it was returned, but 3 months later, Robin's men came for her son. They needed a runner, someone small and quick and loyal. Ullasun wept. The boy went. He was 12, perhaps 13, and proud that Robin Hood had chosen him. He died before winter, trampled by the sheriff's horsemen while carrying a message sewn inside his sleeve. Robin sent Ullasun silver. She threw it into the stream. For 3 nights after, an arrow stood in her door. On the 4th, she took the silver from the water where it had caught among stones, and she never spoke against Robin again. The forest remembered obedience. As Robin's power grew, so did the horror around him. Men began leaving tribute at certain hollow trees. A bishop's steward might tuck coin into a split trunk and ride away without seeing a single outlaw, only to find green feathers tied to his bridle by morning, proof that payment had been accepted. A merchant who refused found his wagons burned, his guards stripped, and his ledgers nailed to his counting table with arrows. A royal clerk, who called Robin a common thief, was discovered in a ditch near Mansfield, with his ink pot poured into his eyes. Yet Robin still knelt at Mass when he dared. He still gave alms. He still spoke the Virgin's name with tenderness. This made him more frightening, not less. He could slit a man from navel to breastbone, and later kneel before a painted saint, lips moving in sincere prayer. He did not think himself damned. He thought himself chosen by a harsher justice than courts could understand. The sheriff of Nottingham decided at last that fear must answer fear. He took hostages from 3 villages known to feed the outlaws. He seized fathers, brothers, and sons. He built a gallows outside Nottingham where the road widened, and announced that 1 man would hang each morning until Robin surrendered. The first dawn, a carpenter was hanged. His wife screamed until she fainted. The second dawn, a shepherd. The third dawn, no prisoner came to the gallows. The sheriff stood armored beneath a gray sky, surrounded by men at arms. Crowds gathered, silent and pale. The noose swung empty. Then a cart rolled from the mist. It came without a driver. The horse was blindfolded. In the cart lay 6 of the sheriff's foresters, bound wrist to ankle. Their faces had been covered with their own green caps. Around each neck hung a strip of parchment. The sheriff tore one free. It read, "1 for 1 is poor measure." Before anyone could move, arrows hissed from the rooftops, from hay wagons, from shuttered windows. Robin's men had entered Nottingham in the night, hidden among traders and pilgrims. The gallows square became a killing ground. A man at arms dropped with an arrow in his ear. Another spun with 3 shafts in his back. Little John burst from the crowd and broke a soldier's jaw with a cudgel. Much cut the ropes of the prisoners, while Scarlet laughed as he hamstrung a horse and sent its rider screaming into the mud. The sheriff fought toward the castle, blood on his cheek, shouting for order. Robin appeared atop the gallows beam itself, balanced like a crow, bow drawn. For a heartbeat, the 2 men saw each other across the chaos. Robin could have killed him. Instead, he shot the sheriff's signet ring from his hand. The arrow took the finger with it. The sheriff fell to his knees, clutching the bloody stump. Robin's voice rang over the square. Nottingham has paid this morning. Next time, I collect in full. Then he vanished into smoke and panic. After that, the sheriff's hatred became a sickness. His hand healed badly. The missing finger throbbed in winter. He dreamed of green feathers sprouting from his skin. He sent more men into Sherwood, and Sherwood ate them. Some were found, some were not. Those who returned spoke of pits lined with sharpened stakes, of ropes that snapped men into the canopy, of deer paths leading in circles, until thirst made them drink from black pools. They spoke of laughter with no bodies behind it. They spoke of Robin's horn sounding first ahead, then behind, then inside their own skulls. One soldier swore that he saw the white stag again, standing beside a tree where 3 hanged men turned slowly, though there was no wind. Another said the trees themselves leaned to hide the outlaws. Men began calling Sherwood cursed. Robin encouraged this. He understood that dread could guard a border better than walls. But dread is a hound that sometimes turns. Years passed in blood and leaf fall. Kings changed, sheriffs aged, abbots died fat in their beds. Robin Hood endured. His beard grew streaked with silver. His shoulders stiffened in cold weather. Scars tugged at him when rain approached. The bow that had once bent like a living thing now demanded a price from his joints. Around the fire, younger men watched him with worship and fear, but Little John watched with something more troubled. One evening in late autumn, when the trees stood black and bare against a bruised sky, Robin failed to draw his bow. It happened in private, or so he thought. He stood beyond the camp near a dead oak. An arrow knocked, aiming at a knot in the bark. His fingers pulled. The string came halfway. Pain flashed across his face. His arm trembled. He released too soon. The arrow struck low and skittered into leaves. For a moment, Robin stared at his hand as if it had betrayed him. Behind him, Little John shifted. Robin did not turn. "You saw nothing," he said. Little John's voice was quiet. "I saw winter come." Robin laughed then, but it was thin and dry. Winter came indeed. It settled in his bones. Fever followed. At first he ignored it. He drank more wine, cursed louder, took shorter raids, and let Will Scarlet lead when the road was long. He still judged disputes beneath the greenwood, still demanded tribute, still smiled when frightened men emptied purses into his cloak. but sweat shone on his face, even in cold air. Sometimes his right hand went numb. Sometimes he woke clawing at his chest, convinced that a man he had buried years before was kneeling on him. Dreams found him. He dreamed of the monk with the burst eye whispering through mud. He dreamed of the boy page running forever between the trees, arrow jutting from his back, never falling, always turning to ask why. He dreamed of Alisoun's son trampled into the road, one hand still clutching the message that had killed him. He dreamed of the sheriff's missing finger crawling like a pale worm across his blanket. He told no one. The men heard him in his sleep. By Candlemas, Robin could not hide the sickness. His skin had taken a waxen color. His eyes burned too brightly. When he stood, he swayed. A swelling rose beneath one arm, hot and tender. Friar Tuck muttered that bad blood had gathered in him. Much suggested herbs, while Scarlet suggested a physician, then laughed when Robin glared. Little John said nothing for a long while. At last, beside the low fire, he said, "Kirklees." The camp went quiet. Kirklees Priory lay beyond the familiar shelter of Sherwood and Barnsdale, a place of women vowed to God, enclosed in stone, prayer, and old resentment. Its prioress was kin to Robin, a cousin by blood. In younger days, before the forest took him wholly, Robin had known her as a stern girl with pale hands and dark eyes. Her name had been Matilda in the world, though behind convent walls she was called by a holier title. She had risen to rule the house with silence and discipline. Travelers said she knew physic, bleeding, herbs, and the balancing of humors. Men and women went to Kirklees to have fever drawn from their veins. Robin smiled when Little John said the name. "My cousin will bleed me," he said. "She owes me kindness." Little John looked into the fire. "Does she?" Robin's eyes hardened. "She is blood." Little John did not answer, but in his mind he saw all the meanings blood could carry: kinship, debt, wound, payment. The next morning, Robin Hood rode out with Little John and Much. He would not take a full company, for pride forbade it. While Scarlet watched him go with unease, hidden beneath a mocking bow. Friar Tuck made the sign of the cross. The younger men cheered until Robin turned in the saddle, and then their voices faded. Sherwood seemed to watch him leave. The road to Kirklees was bitter with thaw. Snow clung in the ditches, gray and old. The trees gave way to moor and field, to low stone walls and sheep with dirty wool. Robin rode wrapped in his cloak, hood low, coughing into a cloth he tucked away before anyone could see the blood flecks blooming there. At an inn near Wakefield, men recognized him and pretended not to. The innkeeper served ale with shaking hands. Robin drank little. Little John drank less. Much stole bread from the kitchen out of habit, though he had coin enough to pay. That night, Robin woke before dawn to the sound of dripping. Drip, he thought the roof leaked. Then he saw the monk from St. Mary's sitting in the corner of the room, one ruined eye hanging on his cheek, water and blood dripping from his sleeve. Robin reached for his knife. The corner was empty. In the bed beside the hearth, Much whimpered in his sleep. By noon they saw Kirkley's priory. It stood among bare trees and winter grass, built of cold stone the color of old bone. Its narrow windows stared without warmth. A bell hung in a small tower, motionless. Crows lined the roof, so many that the building seemed to wear a black crown. Beyond the walls lay a garden of sleeping herbs, and beyond that, a burial ground where crooked markers leaned in the wet earth. The gate opened before Robin knocked. A lay sister stood within, her face hidden by a wimple. She looked at Robin, then at little John, then at Much. "The prioress expects you," she said. Little John's hand tightened around his staff. Robin smiled faintly. Then blood still knows blood. They were led through a passage smelling of beeswax, damp wool, and rosemary. The priory was quiet, but not peaceful. Its silence had pressure. It pressed upon the ears like hands. Somewhere a woman coughed. Somewhere water poured into a basin. Their footsteps clicked across stone. The prioress received Robin in a chamber where a small fire burned without warmth. She was tall, older than he remembered, with a narrow face framed in white linen. Her eyes were dark and steady. She wore no ornament but a simple cross at her breast. Her hands were pale, the fingers long and clean. When Robin entered, she did not embrace him. "Cousin," she said. "Mother Prioress," Robin answered, and knelt with theatrical grace, though the movement made him wince. Her eyes noticed. "You have come late. I have been occupied." "So I heard." Little John watched her. There was history in the room, thick as smoke. Robin looked at his cousin and saw the girl from years before, standing at the edge of a manor yard while men shouted and horses stamped. Her father had lost land in a quarrel that Robin's outlawry had worsened. Her brother had ridden with the sheriff once and never returned from the greenwood. Robin had always told himself the boy had chosen the wrong side. Perhaps he had. The dead rarely argued. The prioress looked at Robin and saw not a hero, not a legend, but the ruin that had passed through her family wearing a green hood. "You need bleeding," she said. "So I am told. You trust me." Robin's smile returned, though sweat stood on his upper lip. "You are my cousin." For the first time, her mouth curved. It was not a smile. "Yes," she said, "I am." She ordered that Robin be taken to an upper chamber where the air was clean. Little John moved to follow, but the prioress lifted a hand. "Only the patient." Little John stepped forward. "Where he goes, I go." Robin turned on him sharply, anger flaring brighter than fever. "You forget yourself." Little John's jaw worked. The prioress watched with interest. Robin softened his voice, which somehow made it worse. "Wait below, drink. Pray if the walls inspire you. I will be bled and done by evening." "Robin," the outlaw's eyes flashed. "I said wait." Little John knelt, but his face had gone pale beneath the beard. Much looked from one to the other. I can stay near the stair. Robin laughed. You can stay near the ale. The lay sisters led little John and much away. As Robin climbed the narrow stairs behind the prioress, he felt each step inside his bones. The chamber prepared for him was small and high, with one narrow window looking toward the dark line of distant trees. A bed stood against the wall. Beside it waited a stool, a basin, linen cloth, a small knife, and a brass bowl polished so brightly that Robin could see his face warped in it. He looked old. The prioress closed the door. The sound of the latch seemed louder than it should have been. Robin removed his cloak and sat. The room smelled of vinegar and dried lavender. His cousin rolled up his sleeve with professional care. Her fingers were cool against his skin. You have grown thin, she said. You have grown severe. God shapes his servants. The forest shapes its own. She tied a band above his elbow, tight enough to swell the vein. Robin watched the blue line rise beneath his skin. Do you remember my brother? She asked. Robin's gaze shifted to the window. I remember many men. His name was Edmund. Robin said nothing. He was 17. He rode with men who hunted me. He rode because the sheriff pressed our house for loyalty after you brought shame upon our blood. Robin looked at her then, and for a moment the old fire returned. Careful cousin. She leaned close, knife in hand. Or what? Will your men creep from under the bed? Will your great bow bend itself? Will Sherwood grow through these stones and save you? The fever pulsed behind his eyes. You forget who I am. No, she whispered. I remember better than anyone. The knife touched his arm. He expected the quick sting, the controlled opening, the release of bad blood into the bowl. He had seen it before. He had endured wounds far worse. The blade slid in. Pain bloomed. Dark blood welled, then ran. The prioress held his arm over the bowl and watched the stream strike brass. The sound was soft at first, almost delicate. Drip, then faster. Drip. Robin exhaled through his teeth. There, she said, let the sickness out. Below, in the refectory, little John sat untouched before a cup of ale. Much chewed bread without tasting it. Around them, sisters moved quietly. Too quietly. No one met little John's eyes. How long? He asked. A lay sister answered, as long as God wills. Little John stood. Two sisters moved in front of the door. Not threatening, not openly, merely there. Much swallowed, John. The big man listened. Above the silence of the priory, he thought he heard dripping. In the upper chamber, Robin's blood filled the bowl. The prioress loosened the band, then tied it again, then adjusted his arm. The blood did not slow. Robin's face had lost color. That is enough, he said. Not yet. He frowned. Enough. She looked at him with the calm of stone saints. You never knew the meaning of that word. Robin tried to pull his arm back, but weakness moved through him with frightening speed. His fingers tingled. The room swayed. "Bind it." She dipped a cloth in the basin and wiped blood from his wrist. Then she set the cloth aside, unstained side up, as if order mattered. "Edmund begged," she said. "Did you know that?" A shepherd found what was left. His hands were tied. His teeth were broken. There was an arrow through his thigh, not to kill him, only to keep him from running. The wolves had come before dawn. Robin's breathing changed. "I did not order wolves. You ordered fear. Wolves are only fear with mouths." The bowl overflowed. Blood ran onto the floor in threads, finding cracks between stones. Robin lurched to his feet. The chamber tilted. The prioress stepped away, taking the bandage cloth with her. He clutched his arm. Blood pumped between his fingers, hot and slick. "Bind it," he snarled. She walked to the door. For the first time, fear touched him. Not fear of battle, not fear of pain. This was older, smaller, colder. The fear of being alone in a room while life leaked out and no command could call it back. "Matilda." She paused at the name. "Mother Prioress," she said. Then she left. The door closed. A key turned. Robin stared. For several heartbeats, he did not move. He had been trapped before. Cages, ambushes, castle cells. There was always a door to break, a guard to trick, a rope to cut, a friend to trust. He staggered to the door and struck it with his shoulder. Once, twice. The second blow sent sparks through his vision. His knees nearly failed. "John," he called. His voice came out hoarse. Below, little John heard something. He rose so violently the bench scraped stone. That was him. A sister stepped into his path. "You must wait." Little John looked at her, and she stepped back despite herself. He moved toward the stairs. From somewhere behind, a door slammed. Another sister cried out. Much darted after him, knife in hand. The priory, so silent before, suddenly filled with movement. Locks turned. Feet hurried. Bells began to ring, not the great bell outside, but small hand bells, frantic and shrill. Little John reached the stairs door. Locked. He struck it with his shoulder. The wood held. In the chamber above, Robin heard the blow faintly through stone. He laughed once, a broken sound. "Good John," he whispered. He tore at his sleeve, trying to make a binding. His fingers would not obey. Blood made everything slippery. The cloth slid. He pressed his arm against his body and stumbled to the window. It was narrow, too narrow for a man. Through it, he could see the world washed in gray light. Fields, bare trees, a slice of road. Far away, perhaps only in memory, the dark smudge of greenwood. He thought of Sherwood in May, leaves new and bright. He thought of deer moving between shafts of sunlight. He thought of the first purse he ever took, the first arrow loosed at a man, the first time someone spoke his name with fear, and he found that he liked it. The room darkened at the edges. The dripping continued. At the stairs door, Little John roared and struck again. The iron hinges groaned. Much found a bench, and together they rammed it against the door. Sisters screamed. Someone shouted for the prioress. Little John did not care. On the third blow, the door cracked. On the fourth, it burst inward. They ran up. Robin had fallen beside the bed. He was trying to reach his horn. It lay on the stool where the prioress had placed it, just beyond his outstretched hand. His fingers crawled across the floorboards, leaving red streaks. He had dragged himself through his own blood. It soaked his sleeve, pooled beneath his elbow, marked his cheek where he had fallen. Little John smashed through the chamber door with one blow of his staff. For a moment, he filled the doorway, huge and terrible. And even dying, Robin smiled. "Took your time," Robin whispered. Little John dropped to his knees beside him. "Christ save us." Much stood behind him, white as milk, one hand over his mouth. "Bind it," Little John said. "Cloth, cloth." Much tore linen from the bed. Little John wrapped Robin's arm, pulled tight, tighter, until Robin groaned. But there was little force left in the bleeding now, because there was little blood left to give. Little John looked toward the door. "I will burn this place." Robin's hand closed weakly around his wrist. "No, she murdered you." Robin's eyes moved slowly, finding him. "No women," he breathed. "No holy house." Little John's face twisted. "After all we have done, you choose now to fear God." Robin's smile showed red at the teeth. "Late prayers count." Outside, thunder muttered, though the sky had been clear. Or perhaps it was only the bell. Robin's gaze shifted to the horn. Little John placed it in his hand. Robin tried to lift it to his lips. He failed. Little John helped him. The sound that came was not the bright call that once made merchants faint and villagers hurry to hide bread beneath floorboards. It was thin, cracked, almost swallowed by the room. Once, twice, the third note broke. Across the fields, crows rose from the priory roof in a black storm. Robin closed his eyes, then opened them again with effort. "My bow." Much fetched it, weeping openly now. Little John strung it with hands that shook. Robin could not stand. So Little John lifted him and held him by the window. The outlaw's body felt shockingly light, as if the forest had already taken back everything it had lent him. "An arrow," Robin said. Much placed one between his fingers. Together, Little John helped him draw. It was not truly Robin's strength that bent the bow, but some last stubbornness passed through both men, some final refusal to die entirely on another's terms. The arrow pointed through the narrow window, toward the wet fields beyond Kirklees. Robin whispered, "Where it falls." Little John bent close. "What?" "Bury me where it falls." The arrow flew. It passed through the gray light, a dark sliver against the world, and vanished beyond the priory wall. Robin sagged. Little John lowered him to the floor. The outlaw's eyes were fixed now not on the room, not on his friends, but on something far away. Perhaps he saw Sherwood. Perhaps he saw every man he had killed waiting among the trees. Perhaps he saw the white stag, antlers bright as bone, turning at last to lead him deeper in. His final breath came softly. It did not sound like a hero's death. It sounded like a leak in a ruined house. For a long time, Little John did not move. Much sobbed into his hands. The prioress appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. Little John rose. He seemed to grow as he stood, until the room could hardly contain him. She did not run. "Do it," she said. His hand tightened on the staff. Robin's dead hand lay open on the floor between them, palm upward. Fingers curled, as if still expecting payment. Little John looked at his master. He looked at the woman who had killed him. He looked at the cross at her breast. Then he made a sound that was almost a sob and almost a growl, and struck the wall beside her head so hard that stone dust fell from the joints. The prioress flinched at last. Little John leaned close. "He spared you," he said. "Remember that every night until God grows tired of hearing you breathe." He carried Robin down the stairs himself. No sister stopped him. They found the arrow in a patch of rough ground beyond the priory, where the grass dipped toward a stand of trees. The shaft had buried itself deep in the earth, quivering slightly in the wind. Little John knelt beside it. They dug with knives, boards, and bare hands. Much as nails tore, Little John's palms bled. They did not stop. Rain began before dusk, cold and needling. It washed Robin's blood from Little John's sleeves and carried it into the soil. They laid Robin Hood in the grave with his sword at his head, his arrows at his feet, and his bow at his side. Much placed the horn upon his chest. Little John covered his face last. Before the first soil fell, he whispered, "You were a bastard, Robin." The rain tapped on leaves. "And I loved you." They buried him deep. When they returned to Sherwood, the camp was waiting. Will Scarlet stood at the edge of the firelight, already knowing. Friar Tuck sank to his knees. The younger men stared as if the world had lost its roof. Little John told them, "Not all enough." Will Scarlet wanted blood. Others wanted Kirklees burned to its foundations, its stones scattered, its garden salted. But Little John stood before them with Robin's last command like a chain around his throat. "No," he said. Will spat into the fire. "Then what are we now?" No one answered. Without Robin, the greenwood changed. It did not soften. It rotted. The tribute trees remained for a season, then two. Men still left coin, more from habit than fear. Some outlaws drifted away. Some were caught and hanged. Much vanished one spring, perhaps to a mill, perhaps to ditch. Will Scarlet led a band of his own for a while, crueler and less clever, until someone found him with his fine red coat nailed to a barn door and no body inside it. Little John walked the forest alone. He grew older. His beard went gray. Children who had never seen Robin Hood sang songs about him in market lanes, songs of kindness, laughter, and golden arrows. Little John heard one once outside Nottingham, sung by a girl with a ribbon in her hair. In her song, Robin robbed only the wicked, spared all who begged, and never took more than justice required. Little John stood in the crowd, Hood shadowing his face, and listened. When the song ended, people clapped. The girl smiled. Little John wanted to tell them about the monk's page, about Osbert's guard crawling through mud, about Alisoun's son, about the sheriff's finger, about the way Robin laughed when danger was near and went cold when mercy cost too much. He wanted to tell them that the dead do not vanish because a song forgets their names. But he said nothing. Legends are graves too. They bury what will not fit. Years later, travelers near Kirklees claimed that a horn sometimes sounded at dusk from beneath the earth. A thin, broken note. Dogs refused the road. Horses shied at the priory gate. The sisters changed. The prioress died, and the house passed through other hands. But the room where Robin bled remained cold, even in summer. They said stains came back through the scrubbed boards. They said a brass bowl kept in the infirmary filled drop by drop, though no one touched it. They said women praying alone heard a man whisper, "Bind it," from behind the locked door. And in Sherwood, when mist lay low and the moon turned the leaves silver, some swore they saw a hooded figure among the trees. Not young, not merry, tall enough in memory to be more than a man, thin as hunger, carrying a bow he could no longer draw. Beside him walked a white stag with antlers like grave branches. Behind him came others, barefoot, broken, arrow-pierced, mud-mouthed, all those who had paid the price of passing through his kingdom. If you met him, the old folk said, you must not offer coin. Coin only reminded him of life. You must lower your eyes and say, "The road is yours, Robin Hood." If he passed without turning, you might live. If he smiled, you were already counted. So remember, when stories make monsters into heroes, ask what was cut away. Ask whose blood was wiped from the ballad. Ask who was left in the ditch so that a brighter tale could ride on. Robin Hood lived in the greenwood, and the greenwood loved him as wolves love winter. He robbed the rich, yes. He fed the poor, yes. He broke the sheriff, humbled bishops, mocked the king's law, and made frightened men speak his name like prayer. But he also built his throne from fear. He made loyalty out of hunger. He gave with one hand and marked the debt with the other. And when his own blood called him cousin, she opened his vein and let all his unpaid reckonings pour out onto a priory floor. The forest kept his secret. The songs kept his smile. The grave kept the rest. Thank you for listening to this dark telling of Robin Hood, the outlaw beneath the legend. Like the video, subscribe for more grim folklore and forgotten horror, and tell me in the comments which legend should be dragged back into the dark next. Until then, keep off the old roads after sunset. Never trust laughter from the trees, And if a horn sounds 3 times in the distance, do not go looking for who blew it. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of the night.